Recognizing the member for Columbia River Revelstoke.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm always up for a promotion. Not a problem at all. I just first of all want to thank my colleague for the time, and through you, Chair, to the Minister for this time that we'll have to talk about a couple of really important issues. It astounds me a little bit, and we don't have a lot of time, but it does astound me a little bit that we talk so much about forestry and mining and tourism and all these other resources, yet the most important resource that we have, which is water, doesn't get a whole lot of time. So I'm hoping that you can work with your House Leader, through the Chair, of course, and get that changed for next estimates. The work that's being done with the modernization of the treaty with the Americans is incredibly important, and I want to thank Kathy and Les, I can say your names, for the incredible work that you do. It's certainly appreciated, and it's so important. But I also want to just take a very quick minute to recognize the CRT Local Government Committee as well. And Cindy Pierce, who's the Executive Director, Linda Worley, who's the Chair, Stan Doyle, who's the Vice Chair, Ron Zust, David Brooks-Hill, Amy Watson, Adrian Cox, Jane Walter, Frank Marino, and Don McLean. I think Keith Page has left, but I thank him for his efforts anyways. So after 16 rounds of negotiations and with the United States and a bout of COVID that kind of interrupted things and derailed things a bit, we are where we are now. And I guess the first question that I would have to the Minister, through you, Chair, of course, is when is there a potential date that might be struck for an agreement in principle?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too would like to introduce staff with me. Of course, Heather Wood, my Deputy Minister, and Les McLaren, the Assistant Deputy Minister from MLA, and Kathy Eichenberger, who's our I would say our lead at the Columbia River Treaty, our guru at the table. So she keeps trying to retire, but we won't let her. So the members asked about the actual date, and there is no actual date. I know the Americans would like to wrap things up by this summer. But from our perspective, we want to make sure we have a approval in principle that we can take back to the Basin residents and say, this is where the direction we're moving in. This is going to be the treaty agreement that we're going to live with for many years. So we want to make sure we get it right. So we don't have an actual date, but we're very respectful of the fact the Americans would like to have a treaty approval in principle by the summer. But for our perspective, as I said, we want to make sure that we get this right. I also, too, want to acknowledge the Local Governments Committee, as the member did. They have been really great in having that collaboration with them. We've been working with them since 2012, and made up of different local government representatives from across the basin. And they have been very instrumental in providing input, feedback, as we go through this whole process over the entire time. So again, a shout out to them, because they've done a lot of great work. So thank you.
Member.
Thank you, through you, Chair, to the Minister for that answer. I'm glad that patience is a virtue when it comes to the Canadian side. The Americans want it done quickly, and it's going to be an interesting watch to see how we navigate that. One of the interesting things I think that shows some movement is, for the first time, and I believe it's the first time, the Canadian Prime Minister and the President Biden actually released a joint statement on the Columbia River Treaty not too long ago, which is interesting. I think it shows support. But I'm also wondering, through you, Chair, to the Minister, is that the play in Canada is a little different. Will this need to go and have a Senate approval once it's done in Canada? But with the different entities in the United States, the different states have different, their process is different than our provinces. And the President has a veto of anything that goes on in the United States. Do you see that as a problem moving forward in terms of ratifying and getting this thing done as quickly as you can? Is there a political barrier associated with this?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yeah, we've talked to the negotiating team. I do not sit at the negotiating team, and no politicians at the negotiating team. We think that's a good thing. So they've talked to the U.S. about their process. They say that they don't know if they will need advice and consent from the Senate prior to the President agreeing and signing the treaty. It is important to note, though, that it has been a bipartisan issue federally with both the Republicans and the Democrats. But unlike in Canada, where BC has a major role in the negotiations, a significant role in the negotiations, that is not the same in the United States. The individual states are not part of that process like we are in British Columbia.
Member.
Encouraging through you to the chair. So I would agree with the American process that it is much different, and thank goodness British Columbia and Canada are together in this. It's incredibly important. So it would be safe to assume that then the states in their view of what that treaty will end up looking like, I'm assuming through the consultations that they've done, like we have here in Canada, are in lockstep with one another in terms of what that's going to look like in the processes. So just get a sense of where they are at. Are they together on this, or is there debate amongst themselves, or is it going to be a collaborative thing?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're not privy to the internal discussions between the states and the federal government. It's very much a federal government process. We know that the federal departments that are part of the treaty discussions are very united and providing input, but the states are not part of that process.
Member.
Thank you for that, Chair, and through to the Minister. I understand that, and I will move off of this so we don't have to play American politics here. But my biggest concern, and the concern I hear from constituents around the River Treaty, is that there will be a presidential election coming soon, and of course they're worried about those negotiations from one president to another president and what will happen with that. So that's a big question mark, and what we don't know. We know what we don't know, right? So anyways, I just want to say for the record that I truly believe that this treaty is one of the most important treaties Canada has signed in a long, long time. It's so important in the sense that with climate change and everything else, that our water is it is, in my opinion, the most precious resource that we have, and we have to make sure that we're taking care of that resource. And I'm just looking at the things that are happening throughout British Columbia right now, whether it be Living Lakes Canada, the Windermere Lake Ambassadors as a great example, or the Columbia Stewardship folks that are doing studies on waters and aquifers and so on and so forth. Just wondering what kind of science has been applied to the study of the Columbia River system and how that process has occurred, and how that knowledge and that data has been incorporated into the negotiations.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So all of the existing science from the groups that the member mentions are contributing to the development of the treaty, but contributing to the development of the operations that address ecosystems. In addition to the science at the table, the First Nations who are at the table are leading further research in collaboration with Canada and BC and NGOs and the environmental organizations on further developing the knowledge of ecosystems, sharing their traditional knowledge and bringing that information to the table as well.
Member.
Thank you very much, Chair, and through you to the Minister. I appreciate that answer. I'm just wondering if there's any forecasting knowledge about, in terms of timing. We're, next 50 years, hopefully we'll still be here, but 150 years, 200 years from now, I'm wondering if those kinds of forecasting in terms of the modeling that's being done, I'm sure it is, but I think it's important for residents to understand that this treaty is being based upon future diagnostics that we're not in the present, we're in the future, and we're thinking about our children's 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 children, those kids up there, if they're from the Kootenays or wherever. But I think that's an important metric to look at, and I'm not sure if you have that or not, but I'd be interested to hear about that.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So BC Hydro is working with climate forecasters from universities in both BC and in the Pacific Northwest region, all part of the Basin. And the modeling shows that we expect more precipitation as time goes on. Less snow, unfortunately, but more rain, but more precipitation. And we're also seeing more extreme weather events, so the modeling is looking at those to determine how that's going to affect things in our areas, whether it's heat domes, atmospheric rivers, things like that. And climate change predictions are being integrated within the model of the part of the negotiations at the table. And also, of course, within the treaty, adaptive management is going to be an important consideration going forward, given that climate change, both for mitigation and adaptation, but also as a result of technological advancements moving forward.
Member.
Well, thank you, Chair, and through you to the Minister. Thank you for that. It's encouraging to know that that kind of modeling is being done inside the treaty process, because we don't know what it's going to look like 100, 200 years from now, and it's really important for Canada that happens. So I'm encouraged to hear that. The next series of questions that I have are based upon the community consultation process. I think it was robust, and I truly believe that the negotiation team has included inside of their negotiations, our side anyway, those things that they heard from the community. And that is not only appreciated, but much needed. When you come to a potential agreement in principle, I'd like to understand a little bit about, and so would the residents of the basins, once that agreement in principle has been reached, will there be other community consultations, or will it be a community presentation? Because a consultation and a presentation are two different things. So knowing you can't start from scratch, will the communities be given an opportunity to hear their voices, again, through a consultation process? And again, through you, Chair, to the Minister, again, wanting to thank the Minister for noting that, and we'll get this on the record so it happens, that there wasn't a community consultation process at the headwaters of the Columbia River in Columbia Lake, and when that was brought to the Minister's attention, one happened right away. So we're looking forward to having the next one as well. So just wanting to know what happens after that consultation, or after the agreement in principle is done. Will there be more consultation, and how is that going to be factored into further negotiations with the Americans?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to acknowledge the amount of consultation with the Basin that has already been done, because it's been ongoing since 2012, I think, maybe not even before that. But there's been a concerted effort to make sure that the constituents are very much involved in the process this time, unlike it was last time. It was a bit of a this is being done to you, not with you. But this is, I mean, the work that's been done has been significant. And a lot of that work that's been done has been brought to the table, and it's been used by the people that are at the negotiating table. It's been brought there to determine the directions we're moving in. So there's been a lot of really good collaboration. And the approval in principle itself, it'll be explained to Basin residents in the same way. It'll be done through meetings with local governments, through the Local Governments Committee, of course, and a series of community meetings, some of them in person and some virtual, because the virtual sessions have been working, especially because, well, the members well aware of the significance of geographical areas in our region, so he understands that. And these meetings will also include the rationale for how negotiations resulted in the agreement approval in principle components, and the BCC Columbia River Treaty team will be seeking feedback on to what extent it reflects the Basin's interests that we heard over the last decade, and whether by and large the overall direction is what communities and residents were hoping to see. And after that, there will still be some negotiations on how to translate the agreement in principle into treaty wording, and refinements from what we heard can be addressed at that stage. There won't be drastic changes because there's been so much input from the from the people in the basin to date, that I don't think there's going to be any surprises when we finally get to the approval in principle.
Member.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the Minister. That's good to hear. And I just, for point of clarification then, if there happened to be, hypothetically, a specific issue that would be consistently brought up throughout the residents of the basin that seemed to say, yeah, this doesn't really work. So is there still flexibility within that negotiation process to actually have that new idea put in? So it's not just a presentation of what the collaborative knowledge has already been, but if there's a new idea that comes forward, is there a possibility to insert that back into the treaty process?
Minister.
Well, so the members posed a hypothetical question, but from my perspective, I think it's highly unlikely there would be anything brand new, but if there was, it would have to be assessed as whether it could be accommodated into the language of the treaty, because right now what's going to be shared is the approval in principle. And so that would have to be looked at to see if it is something, and it would have to be assessed to see if it's something that, whether it could be included or not into the treaty.
Member.
Thank you very much, Chair. As President Reagan said, never say never. But so I guess from that answer, and I totally get it, because we don't know what that consultation process is going to be. So from garnering what I've just heard then, once that consultation and presentation of the principle and treaty, or principle agreement, that's pretty much a fait accompli, really, when you think that there might be, but it'd have to go through a process, is what I think I heard you say.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I think there's been so much discussion in the basin prior to all the work that's been done, and from my perspective, I think would be highly unlikely there would be something brand new that would have to be looked at. I mean, there is some ability to have some small modifications to the agreement in principle, but at the same time, I doubt that that's going to happen much, just because there's been so much input and so much consultation gathered from people throughout the basin.
Member.
Thank you, Chair, and through the Minister, I think that's a very fair answer. And I just, what I hear from residents is that we just want to make sure we get this thing right. We got one kick at the can on this, and we just want to get it right. So I'll move away from the treaty and get on to something we also, both the Minister and I, are so grateful for, and that is, of course, the Columbia Basin Trust. Back in October 17, 2016, an MOU was made between the province and Driven. It took almost, I think, 4 years to build, and at that time the minister was the critic, I believe, and Minister Bennett was the minister in charge of this file. It took him almost 4 years to get this MOU put together with a lot of help from other people. And it's a very unique nature of the trust within the public sector. And inside of this MOU, it's to be reviewed every 3 years. And the last review happened in 2019. And I did ask the minister in last year's estimate if we were going to look at the renewal of the MOU, and she said yes, and I believe her. I'm just wondering if the minister, through you, Chair, to the minister, can explain why we're still waiting for the renewal of this MOU, knowing full well we face COVID.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The member's quite right. It's a very unique relationship between the province and the trust, and the trust's dual accountability to the province and residents of the basin was set out in the original 2016 Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, as the member refers to. And when that document was signed, a commitment was made between the parties to sign it, to review the document every 3 years and ensure it still continued to meet the parties' objectives. And although an overall review did not occur in 2019, we definitely were having discussions about the MOU. And the member's right. Unfortunately, COVID postponed a number of things, and it postponed that for a number of years. And we've had there's been a staff level review done, including input from the trust and from interested government ministries. And that's underway. And I expect it'll be complete fairly soon. And I'm very supportive of this initiative and look forward to considering the results of the review and any recommendations arising from the staff and once they've completed the work. In the meantime, the original MOU is still in place, and government and trust, we continue to maintain strong and collaborative relationship with each other. And I have actually written to the chair and made a commitment that we will look at having been able to sign a completed MOU by this summer, because we recognize how important it is to everybody at the trust, and also it's an important document between both government and the trust as we carry on our relationship.
Member.
Minister, thank you for that. It's encouraging. And I think that this is really a unique agreement between government. I know that Kootenai Bill, when he was doing this, run into some resistance from his own government bureaucrats, and that's why he fought so hard to get this thing over the line. And I'm just going to read into the record that in terms of principle, recognition that the CBAT was created as a unique organization with a distinctly regional purpose, with Columbia Basin residents directing CBT's priorities and activities, and with CBT accountability to the Basin residents. So I think that's remains, as I just heard through you, Chair, to the Minister, part of that. I guess the question that I have just make me feel a little bit better is there any resistance within government right now that you know of that would change the MOU in any significant way?
Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No.
Member.
I'm talking too soon here. Yes. Through you, Chair, to the Minister. Thank you. That's the answer I wanted. In terms of power assets, my question would be on this very, very simple question. Would there currently be a desire within the provincial government at all that would indicate any advocacy to potential sale of minority interests in the hydroelectric projects jointly owned by the Trust and Columbia Power Corporation?
Minister.
No.
Member.
Those are easy answers. Would through you, Chair, to the Minister, would you still consider it unlikely that the provincial government would sell the remaining asset to the CBT?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's interesting the member brings this up. This was looked at a number of years ago, and there was even an agreement in principle that potentially could happen, but it was agreed that it would be difficult because it would be extremely expensive for the trust to purchase the Columbia Power Corporation because of its incredible assets. And I think it's a good time to acknowledge those assets and how much they do for the citizens of the Basin with the initiatives of the trust, but also to our own government coffers, the significant amount of money they return back to government as well. I think it was an excellent investment by the government of the day when they invested in the original trust, because I think it's come back number of times over and over again. They have recouped that fund, so those funds.
Member.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and through the Minister. I can't agree with you much more than that. I also just want to recognize Johnny Stroyev and all of his staff at CBT. They do such a wonderful job, and I know that we are the envy in the Columbia Basin of so many other places in the province. When you get, I think if I recall off the top of my head, the CBT got $76 million last year to invest into the basin, and without CBT, I would dare think we are not anywhere near where we possibly could be. So I beg the Minister's forgiveness really quickly to jump back, because I forgot one thing about the river treaty. Just want to know where we are with in terms of the Libby Dam. I know that, before we have a quick answer on that, I'm also going to ask the minister if we could have a potential debriefing with myself and my colleague from Kootenay East at some other point around Libby Dam and BC Hydro. So I'd ask that question, but just a quick update as to where we are with Libby, because it's inside the treaty, but it was built not within the treaty.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to just further to the members' comments about the amount of funds that the CBT puts back into the basin, and just to remind people that it is retribution from the extensive damage that was caused to the basin because of the Columbia River Treaty, and we have to remind people of that because they think people don't remember that, so we have to remind them of that, why the original trust was created, etc. And I thank you for the member for raising this. I was thinking, why didn't he talk about Libby? I thought for sure it was going to come up. So definitely, so that the province has heard loud and clear how residents in the Kuskanus area are impacted by Libby coordination. And those, I mean, the residents have been extremely passionate about making improvements to reservoir conditions for recreation, for fisheries, for ecosystems, and also for agriculture. And they are being heard. And a much improved collaborative engagement approach is being discussed at the negotiating table, and very lengthy discussions. I can't tell the exact details at this point, but what I am told, I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll see change for the better with Libby and all the issues that members from the area have raised.
Member.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Minister. Thank you for that. One other around the treaty that I spaced out is around the First Nations component of the negotiation team. 3 First Nations, Canadian First Nations that are Observer Plus, which I think is just outstanding. I just want to know from the Minister if those 3 nations had the same kind of collaborative discussions within their nations like you did with non-First Nations outside of their communities, with our communities. So was that a collaborative conversation, and were their ideas and inputs from their nations put into their representatives so that those could be shared as well?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the Indigenous nations that the member was referred to, they're an integral partner in developing the negotiation positions and in contributing to Canada's proposals to the U.S. along with Canada and BC. It's the Ktunaxa, the Okanagan and the Secwépemc. And they're regularly engaged with their leadership and their communities throughout this process. Each nation has their own process on how they'll consult with their nations and their leaders and their members. And in addition to that, BC and Canadian representatives have also been consulting with the Indigenous leadership and communities throughout the process. The nations, in fact, yesterday they had an all-day meeting with the local governments committee, meeting with them, talking about issues. Ecosystems, of course, is a big issue. So, but they met all day. So their consultation, and they've also been part of the regular consultations that have happened throughout the basin. The nations themselves, the representatives have been involved with those discussions as well. So,
Member.
Through you to the Minister, I'm being told I'm out of time. I would just ask the Minister through you, Chair, to submit some more questions. But I just want to say through you, Chair, to the Minister, to thank you very much and Kathy and Les and everyone else for what you do. This is an incredibly important file, and it means so much to the people of the Basin. And with that, I'm getting a dirty look, so thank you very much.
Minister.
I would just like to say how much I appreciated this opportunity. I wish we could have more time to discuss this because it is critically important. It's not only important to the basin, and I'd like to remind people, it's important to our province because, as I say, it directly contributes significant dollars to our coffers, which benefits everybody in the province. So I like to remind people of that. It is a great asset to have, and the treaty will be a great asset once we get it finalized as well. But any other questions the minister or the member would like to, I'm upgrading, giving you a promotion again. The member would like to submit, we'll be only too happy to answer. So